Hi, people. Welcome to my series Mind and Soul, where I look at the different issues that interact with education. In the previous episode of Mind and Soul on the politics of education, I said that politics is about what we do to reinforce our philosophy or what we believe or what is valuable to us. I also said that the questions that adults should be asking about education are questions about politics, what we shall do, and philosophy, what do we value. Questions about quality, about certificates, about exams and curriculum, without asking these two questions about philosophy and politics, are immature questions. And yet, these are the questions that dominate our conversations in Kenya about education. Like one of the questions I had started to hate, which the media asked for 2 years, was what is wrong with CBC? I mean, after 2 years, if you're still asking that question, it means that your mind is not growing. It not means that you're not learning, and it means you're incapable of thinking broadly, which is actually confirms what the European racists were saying about us when they were saying that we don't need literal education because our minds can't handle it. But of course, that is not who we are as Africans. So why do we behave uh, on the contrary? The reason we are stunted politically and philosophically is because of the colonial state. Our politics and our institutions, they limit our discussions as Kenyans to ethnicity, or we reduce our big political issues to documents, to clauses in the constitution, or to red tape, whether procedure was followed or not. And the government likes this and the political class likes this because they have narrowed the conversation to become so thin, because once it is narrow, it is easier to control. You control people by narrowing what they can talk about. Let me give an example of BBI. If you look at the BBI conversation, when it started, the media and the political class were telling us to read. They were saying, have you read the document? If you raise any questions about the document, you're told read first and ask questions later. And then, of course, the media were telling us that Kenyans don't read. In fact, I think they were telling us not to read, but pretending it's us. The problem is us. So, what we, the people, need is a mature conversation about BBI. And if you look at the questions, for example, that Jerotich asked when she's talking about BBI, they are mature questions. And in fact, they're just so nice to listen to, because she asked questions about who made the decision about this document, or what the content of the document. How was it made? Can you articulate a political process or a philosophical foundation of this BBI that you are giving us? And when you think about it, that was the same thing I was doing with CBC. I was asking who made the decision? What was the process of making that decision? And what values guided this decision? But many Kenyans insulted me. KICD avoided me because I refused to limit the discussion of CBC to curriculum and jobs. I was asking about the politics and the philosophy. So this is the problem of our political conversations in Kenya. And Kenyans, we need to grow up. If we are parents, and if we are older than 35, and I'm just giving a rough number, it's not set in stone, I'm just giving a rough number. If we are around 35 and above, and we are still asking questions about skills and the job market, then we are immature. We should not be asking those questions, because that's the time we are already maybe quarter way into our career. We have children we are taking to school. We cannot be asking about jobs the way we were asking in Form 2. Which job will I do? Remember that question we always ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? How can you still be asking that question at 35? That question of the market is not yours. It's for the youth. And I would even say roughly that from 0 to 18, kids are asking, what do the parents want? And what do I want? From 18 to 35, when they're going to college and they start looking for a job, they're asking, how I be an adult? How do I contribute to my society through work? How do I raise a family? Those are the questions that people are asking. After that, you should be asking questions about who are we? What do we do together? And is it that we value so that we know what we want to do? That's what being an adult is about. The questions we should be asking are, what kind of society do we want for our children? What kind of values or philosophy do we want them to have? And what do we do to make that happen? And that's the politics. Because And even after that now, when we are talking about these things, we also now relate it to education and to schooling. We ask, how does what we do and the values we hold, how are they reflected in the schooling system and its content, or even just the way it is done? Now, some of you will tell me those questions are just theory, they are luxury, because you are still finding difficult to put food on the table. But that's a political problem still. If after 35 your income is insecure, the institutions are insecure, then that's a political problem. It's not a problem of whether kids were taught to sweep and to cook in school. It's a political problem of my kids are not getting jobs, or I'm still hustling because there's something wrong with the economy. And those are questions now you take up in the political sphere. You don't go running after KICD to find out what is on page 2 of a textbook to determine why you don't have a job today. And this is why I was saying on the NTV program where I first met with KICD, and I will share the link to that program, I was saying this: we cannot promise jobs from a curriculum, because the lack of jobs is an economic problem that is tied to our politics. It cannot be fixed by changing what kids are taught in standard 1 and standard 2. Now, if you find these issues too theoretical or a luxury, you need to be sorting it out politically, asking who is in charge of the economy and what decisions are they making? Where are the resources going? Because the truth is, our economy is still colonial. It is still for enriching a few who make the decisions at the expense of the rest of us who have to do the work. The only difference is that the color of the skin of these few is now varied. It includes people with white skin and people with black skin, but it's still the same system where a small minority controls the destiny of the majority. And that's why the government wants you to focus on curriculum, on details about sweeping and, I don't know, eating sandwiches and doing other strange things. And the problem is that now you accepted CBC with the colonial logic that I have been talking about laborers of the rich. You were told that the majority of the children would be working in technical positions, and you just accepted without asking what kind of technical jobs are we talking about. You accepted without realizing that the elites will not send their kids to this school system. And the thing is, once these problems of the economy were reduced to the curriculum, then you accepted the questions the government asked, and then you had to accept the answers that they gave. Because whoever asks the questions almost always determines the answers. So the question of market and jobs when it comes to education is a question 20-year-olds should be asking, not you. That's not your job as the parents. We need to be the adults and to stop asking the questions our youth are already asking. And in fact, the youth are quite capable of raising these questions about the economy. You've been seeing, for example, that Twitter thread where a graduate of engineering talked about doing back-breaking work in a factory. So our young people are very capable of asking these questions. I don't know why we are asking those questions for them. And unfortunately, the government is not answering them. The government is not telling the youth what we shall do about this unequal economy, about the problem with the way the economy is structured, so that our youth can be able to earn themselves an income and start families comfortably. The government is not answering those questions. And instead of us parents telling the government, our children are asking a question, they need an answer. What are we doing? We are the ones now answering the question on behalf of the government. We are the ones telling our young people not to look for jobs. That's not our work. Our work is to do other things, to be the parents. The work of explaining why the jobs are not there is the work of the government. So why are we doing their work? We need to grow up and be the adults. And being adults means asking mature questions like, what is education? What do we want work to be? And how do we want to distribute resources? Because how we think of work determines how we think of education. Other questions are, should education be limited to schooling? What kind of education do we want outside the school system? These are the mature, older people's questions, not where is my job? Stop looking for jobs. That's not our conversation. Let the government tell the youth how they are going to get jobs. That's not for parents, for adults, for citizens to be asking. And this would also help us to stop this immature behavior we have of blaming kids for their behavior. When, for example, we see teenage pregnancy, we need to stop these bad manners of getting sexually aroused and talking about our children like we are perverts or like our children are perverts. The questions we should be asking are, have we provided the means for our children to get wholesome work, wholesome education? Why haven't we done it or, or not? What do we need for our young people to be meaningfully engaged? That's what citizens ask. So we need to leave our childish ways behind. We need to think like adults, and to think like adults is to think and to see the world in its complexity and to make decisions together uh, that match how we see the world. And I'm going to share a link to an article on maturity that was written by my friend and philosopher Louis Gordon. Although it is limited to hip hop, I think it has a very good philosophical discussion of what adulthood means. And once again, this is why we need the arts and humanities, because that's where we ask those questions. And this doesn't mean that if you are a scientist, you don't need the arts and humanities. I mean, look at, for example, the great work that is done by Mordecai Ogada, and I'm going to share a link to some of his articles as well. Mordecai talks not only about science, but about how we apply science. What are the values that we use to apply the sciences? And what should we do? Which is a political question. What should we do about environmental matters, about wildlife matters? That's what maturity looks like. And it applies across the board from 35 onwards, whether you're a doctor, a teacher, a scientist, a sweeper, anywhere. The questions you should be asking are, what should we do? And what are the values that guide what we should do? This is not limited to a certain profession or people who have a certain rank or level of education. So let's abandon our immaturity. It will be difficult, of course, because we live in a political system that values immaturity and childish behavior and punishes people who are mature. So that's why you see we have people like Sonko who behave like juveniles in public. We have people even like Boris Johnson who just takes everything as a joke. And yet we are talking about serious matters that are linked to life. But uh, it's not hopeless. We can return to maturity, but return through telling our stories. And once again, I would say stories, stories, stories. If we learn to tell the stories of our lives and to listen to the stories of others' lives, whether they are alive today or they lived a long time ago, we will be able to see the kinds of political and philosophical questions and actions that we need to be taking. So, if we want the kind of education that our children deserve, we have to be the parents and ask mature questions about education.